Instead of even the appearance of some central theme, we'll have another tonight. Commentary based in tribute to that great erstwhile Cambodian leader, Pot Pari. And don't any of you people out of town send me a letter telling me I don't know how to pronounce Pot Pari. Or telling me the right makeup of brass, or anyone point out that my regional accent becomes worse every few months. Don't waste your time. Apparently, odds and ends, the time has come again, for several reasons, but the time has come again for me to seriously ask you to seriously consider, what in the hell are we doing here? What are you doing here? You feel like this is on the basis of producing some sort of enlightenment? Is it on the basis of a low-level religion? Is it to produce comfort, fellowship? To give you some kind of peace? What in the world do we continue to meet here for? And what in the world are you people getting this from afar? Why do you continue to show up on a weekly basis and watch this and to take it seriously to some degree? What in the world are we doing? It seems obvious enough. Don't worry about unrecognized motivations and all of that stuff. But any other meeting, groups of people, seems obvious enough. If they're meeting at a synagogue, at a church, at a Kiwanis luncheon, at a clubhouse, the purpose is stated without you having to get into any sort of unprofitable internal dialogue about people being in church and not really doing what they claim they're doing. You're missing the point. At least they have a claim as to what they're doing. And what do you claim that you're doing? And all of you, if I insisted that everyone had to speak up, then almost all of you would attempt to feed me back some description from me. So it would sound all right if I said everyone has got to tell me why they're here, and you felt as though this might be a challenge. Then everyone would say something about, I would like to activate higher circuits. I would like to be able to see with a capital S. I would like to be able to be conscious outside the ordinary limits, above line level consciousness. And all of that stuff you got from me, in other words, you got from somebody else. But if I ask you, why are you here? What is it that brings you back? You do not come back just to become an expert on my terminology. What is it that brings you back? Is it the feeling of some kind of fellowship, that you feel more at ease with these people here than any other crowd out in life? If so, that's a real boon. That is really a major breakthrough, isn't it? All right, delete the sarcasm, the apparent sarcasm. Why do you think many people are in a temple or a church or a mosque? No pessimism or sarcasm again. When the yellow circuit, at least when words begin to talk about so-called religion, ordinary consciousness can certainly get pulled to pieces. I assume all of you had enough undergraduate work, History 101 and 102 at least, and then from your own reading here and there, that you should realize that your own partnership perhaps, and then many so-called historians or commentators really lay it on the Catholic Church, for instance. And they pick out things like the Inquisition. They pick out such things as the commercial side of the church during the Middle Ages. They pick out the things of all these popes that killed one another, plotted against one another, had more mistresses than they had toes and brains, and to point some kind of finger, and you miss the point. You hear the word, the yellow circuit, you hear the word religion, and people assume that it should be a certain thing. So you can assume your own partnership, that those apparently pursuing some religious or would-be mystical aim are truly involved to the best of their ability. And the churches are full of people that simply feel more comfortable there than they do at home. They feel more comfortable there than they do down at the neighborhood bar. They feel more comfortable there than they do in the bosom of their own family. So you cannot discount that. You make a mistake. And you also make a mistake if you discount, no matter how your partnership and other people disagree historically, but to see the social significance, the civilizing influences of all religions. I just pick out the Catholic Church, but of all religions. I dare say that if we could push any of you truly above line level consciousness, if we could get you away from the ordinary partnership, and I insisted, tell me why you continue to come here, you don't know. Tell the truth. Damn it, it's just us. Right now, take a couple of seconds and tell the truth. If I have to play this game, if I said, right now we're going around the room and you people out of town have got to write me, and you've got to give me an answer that I find satisfying. Better yet, you've got to give me an answer that I can hear, that there is a certain kind of truthfulness from you, which we have never defined what truthfulness is. Life holds it very dear, does it not? Everyone's encouraged by your mother and your religion, no matter what it was, to tell the truth. And it's really more a matter not of telling the truth as you would normally define the terms in that sentence, but it's more a matter of a kind of direct access and kind of direct circuitry reaction to incoming info. That is closer to the reality of telling the truth than any definition that you would come up with. But be that as it may, if I insisted you've got to tell me something that rings of the truth, in my mystical way, I'll know to you. There is no right answer verbally, but I will know from you that you are responding rather directly from your own circuits. That it's almost a direct reaction without going through an intricate motif through different circuits. That it almost hits and it springs back. So if I insist that you've got to, because I'm going to cut down on our numbers here, how many of you do you think, when I started pointing around, sorry, why are you here? Just real quick, why do you keep coming back? How many of you really think you could say anything that would qualify as the truth? The closest thing any of you could finally say was some of you would say, I don't know. And you know that's the truth. But now look at it from another way. Is that not a, what would the word be? Weird? Is that not a weird commentary on all this serious business? That the closest thing you could say to the truth would be, in response to my question, why are you here? Why are we all meeting like this? The closest any of you could put in words would be, I don't know. What do you think of that? And don't bother to listen to your own internal rumblings to disagree with me, because I just told it like it would be. So don't think that you could come up with a better answer. You couldn't. Anything less than that would probably get you thrown out if I was doing such a thing. So what can you make of that? Since I get many, many requests to speak more about statistics, all right, 98.7, you can write this down, 98.7 of ordinary humanity, that is of the many, feel the complete lack of any grand plan or design in their life. And what they find life to be is simply a series of unexpected problems and disappointments. Now, this is not in any way an emotional, a spiritual, a religious commentary on the sad nature of life. It's nothing like that. But don't worry about now for a second whether you're part of the many or not. Does what I just described fit? Do any of you have any plan in life? And ignore any internal conversation you may immediately have in response to that, such as, well, people on a spiritual quest don't have cheap plans. Well, I'm not worried about getting a new Corvette I'm worried about enlarging my soul and shrinking my waist. Never mind what may be the internal rumblings of you trying to qualify your response. I'm asking you, do any of you feel as though you've got anything resembling a grand plan of any kind? Now, you may, as I said, your own partnership may immediately want to respond, well, at least, in a sense, I am not caught up in these so-called grand plans of trying to be famous and rich. So what is your grand plan? And you're back to what I said if I ask you, why do you continue to come here? In a sense, the most truthful answer any of you could give would be, I don't know. What kind of grand plan is that? And yet people involved with such as this do firmly believe, feel, suspect, sense, surmise that you are indeed exceptional. You're in the minority. Not necessarily in the way that you believe you are right now, but you are in the minority. That's why I continue to refer to it as the few. At least I didn't say the chosen ones. Of course, me saying the few is almost as bad, but we'll let it go for the time being. Of course, the chosen ones or chosen people sounds as though the gods of the forces, in a positive way, selected them. But don't close the door to other possibilities. The chosen ones could be, that could be a rough translation from some more ancient language, which really meant the ones picked out are those. It just sounds better to say the chosen ones. And it sounds a little better for me to say the few as opposed to the many. But anyway, you do correctly assume, if nothing else by accident, that you are in the minority, that you are part of the few. But the few's got to have plans. Now, if you're going to say the many, the Philistines, they got their plans. What they want is external power. What they want is wealth that they can't use. What they want is prestige. And I'm beyond all of that. All right, what is your plan? And the truth is, you got no plan. So if that be true, how can you be exempt from the rest of what I stated that was true for 98.7 of humanity? That without such a grand plan, without such a grand design, all you're going to end up with is a continuing, and remember, I'm not using this in just some everyday mundane sense. I'm talking about that this becomes the pillars that hold up your life. It becomes a continuing series of what seems to be unexpected problems and disappointments. Because if you got no plan, it's just continual disappointments. But then I might ask, those of you of yellow circuit aspirations, how in the world can you be disappointed if you don't have a plan? Well, if I got no real plans, how can you be disappointed? That gets into, I don't know if there is such a field, I may have to finally establish it, as particle mathematics. But it would seem to be irrational, to say the very least, that you could be a ship making for no port and find ill wind. To paraphrase Sam Aurelius, was that who it was? Or his brother Marco? Don't write me and tell me who it was. I know who it was. But how could it be that if you have no grand plan, if there is no overall design for your life, how can you be disappointed? All right, in the world of particle mathematics, this computes. And I'm not going into that since I just made up even the name of the field here in the last 2 minutes. And it'd take me another 30 or 40 seconds to make up the field itself. So we won't stop and postpone it. Let's just stay with what seems to be the realm of everyday common sense. How can you be disappointed if you have no plan? But then I ask you, are you not continually disappointed? And the answer is, yes. Yes, Daddy, we are. I just feel disappointed sometimes for no reason. I just wake up and I feel disappointed. I'm jogging down the street and I turn a corner. Same way I turn every day, and there's that 7-Eleven store, and I suddenly was just overcome with disappointment. Oh, sometimes I call it the blues, or I suddenly feel heavy-footed, but it's disappointed. You just turn the corner, you feel disappointed. You look up, and it's getting hot, and you're disappointed. It gets an overcast, whereas it was clear when you start out running, and you feel disappointed. You go in to find something that you read was on sale, and you get there, and they say, well, we sold out, and you're disappointed. Or you got there, and you read the ad Sunday, you got there, and you says, the sale's still on? They said, yeah, and you still have the product? They say, yeah, and then you look at it, and you're disappointed. Or you ask, the sale still on? Do they still have it? And the answer is yes, yes. You look at it, you buy it, you take it home, and you put it on. You wear it, you use it, and you're disappointed. And then the other part I pointed out there is a continuing series of what seems to be unexpected problems. And I do not mean this in some, again, exotic sense. It's everything from your car continues to fall apart, just over and over. You continue to hurt yourself over and over and over. And you keep saying to yourself that I'm hung up in some kind of psychological, well, but I've got to stop doing this. I've got to be more careful. You find that you continue to misuse, break, hurt objects, and you say, I'm going to be more careful. It's just I should be more aware of such as this, and you don't do it. I'm talking about that sorts of things. I'm not talking about finding out that your wife or husband has run off. It's just what seems to be a continuing series of unexpected problems that fits into this continuing feeling of disappointment. I ask you again, how can it be, since you know this is true, this feeling of continual disappointment, how can that be if I was indeed correct when I started this, when I said that nobody has a grand plan? So how can you be disappointed? In the world of particle mathematics, though, I could say, how could it be otherwise? At first it would seem that you couldn't be disappointed if you didn't have a plan. You couldn't find yourself in the wrong part of town if you weren't planning to go anywhere. But if you look at it another way, if you're not planning to go anywhere, just nowhere, then you're continually disappointed. That is not religious in the ordinary sense. It is not rational. It is not reasonable. And as I said, even mathematically, I could turn it into an equation and it would not compute at this level. At the particle level, it certainly computes because everything does. I guess after requests about me speaking on statistics, one of the next most popular subjects I hear about are cosmic truths. Right, there are no little, and by little I mean anything that you can comprehend. There are no little cosmic truths. Now what you would be dealing with, the reality behind that notion would be the undisturbed infinite comment. That is what people would be talking about. That is the reality. But the yellow circuit, among other things, humanity at the ordinary level of consciousness believes that there is cosmic truth. A cosmic truth, a handful of cosmic truths. If you did not give a decent answer to my response about why you here by saying you don't know, then I would suggest that you and many other people under these conditions would believe that besides any possibility of a kind of fellowship, comfort, or being involved with this, that there is the desire for some kind of illumination, some kind of extraordinary instructions, enlightenment. That is, that I be privy to the cosmic truths. There's got to be somewhere behind all these religions, behind all these philosophical ideas that I've read about and thought about all my life. There has got to be the kinds of things right now that physics, ordinary horizontal physics, keeps looking for, the theory to explain everything, the unified field theory if they can come up with it. Get it down to the ordinary level, they're hoping for one, which is all right. They can hope for any, all they want to. But that would be about the same way we would be spiritual people, such as God is good or Jesus saves. A cosmic truth. To give you in the partnership room to dance around a little bit is why I gave you the possibility of either desire for the cosmic truth or cosmic truths in the plural. That might be two or three. But there are no such things. The closest thing that would be verbally to describe would be the undisturbed infinite comment. Then I suggest that you'd be left with facing this. This will be getting close to the realm of particle mathematics, although I didn't plan it this way. And I'll leave it in words, and that would be that there is a distinct possibility with a few people, the few. The many is no problem. The many, it must be otherwise. But with you people, there is the possibility, the distinct possibility that the yellow circuit can noun itself to death. I could further suggest to you that throughout the history of man have been these mythological / religious tales of father side. Don't write me, all right, I guess it's pater side, isn't it? Pater side. Or keep on the sunny side, or don't lay on your side. How about all of these stories of princes slaying their fathers, humans being adopted by the gods, and then they get the least amount of power, and the first thing they want to do is take away the gods' women, and right after that, they try and kill the god that's adopted them. All religious books have some tales of sons killing their fathers. Then in our century we've had psychology, and there's been all these stories many of you are familiar with, psychological theories of boys being in direct competition with their fathers. That was before life seemed to take women seriously. They didn't have any great stories about women. But all these stories that boys are in competition with their father, and that somewhere down the line they even become drunks or take up dope because they wanted to kill their father and they were afraid to, and all that. Might I suggest to you the possibility of the yellow circuit in the civilized sense, in the sense of us being here and me being able to ask you why are we here and you not being able to answer, that the yellow circuit could be looked at as your contemporary father. And all these stories are represented, even 5,000 years ago, that these stories represented man turning back around and almost attempting to slay his father. That is, taking the infinite comment and nouning it to death. Murdering it. Killing it. By a continual attack on it. And the attack is what? Cutting it up. So it'll make sense. So that you can say something. So that you can extract a goddamn sentence out of it. There's got to be a sentence out of it. And there does. Or, as all of you know, I'm sure you can repeat by now, we would not have lights, TV, clothes, shoes, underwear, coffee, hot chocolate, styrofoam. But the belief that there are cosmic truths or a cosmic truth, if it can be said to the ordinary and it can be heard by the ordinary, you can call it a cosmic truth all day, all through the night, until the kinks come home. But you've heard it all before, you've read it all before, and did this great cosmic truth, as proclaimed by somebody or some group, did it have any real effect on you? And the answer is, huh? Of course, I could be facetious, I guess, and point out that it's been a few months at least that I have pointed out, and to some of you, I guess, you've never heard me say it directly, that there is a great deal to be said about saying very little. which cannot be in our day and time necessarily taken literally, because as long as you're out there working and dealing with life and visiting your family, doing all sorts of things, you've got to talk. But you do not have to take it seriously. And it does not have to come from an apparent center of what you are. The kind of things that would flow through the partnership. You may want to censor them, you may want to edit them, you may try and cut them down to an absolute minimum. Sometimes you may try to encourage them. But there's a difference between talk going on. There's a difference between the yellow circuit running, or the even blue and partially the red circuit running somebody's tongue, yours or anybody else's. There's a difference between that and you having control over it. That even when apparently you got no control, even when you apparently, let us say that you absolutely turned it over to the red circuit. Let us say that you have gone out and for the first time in your life, you have just got through running 8 miles nonstop, and you run into somebody you know, or you get back to your place, and you're talking to your man or woman, and suddenly you make Daffy Duck sound like a deaf mute, sound like a retiring wallflower, and it's just babble. But it's a matter of whether you got control over it. But beyond that, I repeat to you that there is the danger, unless it's under control, there is the danger, if you're taking it seriously, whether it's babble or whether you consider it non-babble, is the danger of the yellow circuit nouning itself to death. That is, everything gets explained in short packets, that is, little sentences of info. That you become a walking compendium of your own, you may assume, aphorisms, little bitty truths that may eventually all add up to one big cosmic truth. But if you believe that, let me ask you, why are you here? And the answer is, you don't really know. Why do we continue to meet here? You don't know. And yet all these little packets are going to add up to the big truth. The closest thing to the big truth verbally is the undisturbed infinite comment. You can walk in, you can walk out, but you can't take anything with you. If you take anything with you, what you have done is attacked your father, in a sense. If you have not committed morbific father-side, you've heard it. You have been a party to a possible attack on the race of genes, the father and the grandfather of us all. You are cutting up the infinite comment. You're brutalizing it, you're traumatizing it. If it had a psychology, you would be traumatizing its poor little psychology. Because you would walk in, and every time you came out, your hands would be bloody. And you would not need the Mad Prince of Denmark hanging around the back door, him or any of his relatives, pondering over the fact that madness among the great cannot unchecked go. Because that sounds fine when Shakespeare put it in somebody's mouth. But if you think that's the truth, just look around. Of course, that wouldn't really qualify madness among the great. Go look in a damn mirror if you don't believe that madness among the great can unchecked go. You're still alive, aren't you? You're still free. They haven't locked you up. I mentioned to you of a substance, VAM-V12 in the blood. I mentioned to you over a period of years now, even before I put a name on it, that one description of what this activity was about on a very physical plane was being able to enrich the blood, being able to keep the blood enriched, as a matter of fact, to where it would go beyond the point, physically, in the nervous system, the brain itself, and feed areas that are not now fed, that in essence areas of the brain itself that are inactive. And that so-called mysticism, so-called states of enlightenment, awakening, and etc. were moments when blood got to the areas of somebody's brain, and it doesn't matter what religion, it doesn't matter what era, you take some poor person, poor, P-O-O-R-E, whether it be a little sheep herder in Albania, whether it be some Arabian chieftain, whether it be some bookie in Liverpool last week, you let that blood get to somebody's brain that has never been touched before, and they're going to have an experience, use any term you like, that's going to qualify as super weird. So keeping that in mind, could any of you see that in a sense what I'm describing, mentioning to you as being the substance MV12 in the blood, could be seen on the mortal level as a direct reflection of the infinite comment. With the infinite comment in man and in other creatures, but man's the only thing that particularly interests you, that the infinite comment has been chopped up. That is, there has been a temporary end put to the comment, has been cut up, and that is where the blood stops. That is what I have in the past referred to as the ordinary level of consciousness, of my old diagram of the brain of man and the nervous system, and the blood going up just to wherever line level consciousness is in humanity right now, and that's it. But do you understand that any time you get to a place where there seems to be a period, it could appear to be just a comma. But when the sense stops, when the rhythm has slowed down, such as right there, so when it seems as though you have got to a point that one comment, one statement, one point has been made, and now we may be going on to another one, or that may be the end of it for the time being. Whatever it is, you have stabbed at your father. You have brutalized, in a sense, the infinite comment. So can you see that if there were a continual flow, if it was not true in man, which it can't be otherwise, or we would indeed be life itself, there has to be, at any given time and place, a stopping point, that things seem to reach some kind of finality. That by itself, if you're following any of this, precludes a, quote, cosmic truth, because all you have got is a piece of the scalp, a piece of flesh that you have ripped as you attempted to stab your father in those kind of old silly mythological tales. You have brutalized and cut up the infinite comment into some statement, into some sentence, some sentiment, or even the great cosmic truth. Last time I made a list, I think it was about number 6 on the order of request, was people wanting me to talk about the Wild West. So, well, let's see, that's either 6th or 7th. I get them, because 6 is hydraulics, and then the Wild, it's either hydraulics and then the Wild West, or vice versa, but no matter. How about frontiers, the Wild West? The American story of the Wild West is a good example, as is, from a Western viewpoint, the spread of Western civilization, which coincidentally spread west. But there seemed to be, at all times, a kind of moving frontier. And it went like this. Or before I even give a little description, beyond the history of the American Wild West and other areas. But I'll use American development of American West as an example, based upon, as I said, it being number 6 or 7 on the list of desired subjects. It's not only true, it was not only true, if it was true in American history, it's true in this, that there seems to be a moving frontier. There's a frontier And as it is called, you've all heard the term, the American frontier, what they're distinguishing, even if it was just a few miles inland from Jamestown or Plymouth Rock, the frontier was when, by their viewpoint, their description at the time, civilization, order, broke down. If you go past here, if you get outside where you can see, outside the gates of Jamestown, assuming Jamestown had gates, they could say, hey, you go out there, you're on your own. That was the frontier. And what they were describing was, there is an area wherein we seem to be civilized. There seemed to be a certain amount of decorum and order. And then the frontier is the line past which it is disordered, uncivilized. Does that sound familiar to anybody? But it is a movable frontier. It has always been a movable frontier because at one time, absolute wilderness, complete, or a complete feral area was just beyond the Appalachian Mountains, for instance. That was the Wild West. To get past what nowadays I guess would be just West Virginia into Kentucky. It's not been that long ago. What did it take? Your great-great-great-grandparents? That was the Wild West to go from, believe it or not, New Jersey or Virginia, from Richmond up to the edge of the mountains and then get there and look over, and Jesus, it's uncivilized and who knows what's going to happen. But then, 10 years, it had moved, and you could get over the mountains, and it was civilized. You had relatives over there. The part that seemed to be disorganized, uncivilized, disordered, the frontier continued to move. And then so-called civilization would catch up with what was erstwhilely the wild frontier, but now the frontier had to move. Does anybody hear any possible connection? Now, sure, you laugh, but you're not sure. There is a connection. I told you that before we started. In various ways, many of you are already going through that. That there is a movable frontier, and that which was disorganized, that which was uncivilized in you at one time, that which was the dangerous frontier, that which you did not necessarily have any useful terminology for. You might have thought about it as my baser self. Had you continued to be religious, you might have thought about it as being my more mundane, my less religious self. You know, that old side of me that is prejudiced and wants to drink and smoke dope and all that stuff. But there is a movable frontier in everyone. Of course, it sounds as though me using history, it would be taking this movable frontier of civilized, that's the United States. I ran a room down here, no offense to Texas, that it would seem to be going like that. And then the frontier moves and it goes like that. And everything to the right of it is now civilized. And then this is the wild frontier. And that moves on out, God only knows why, even to finally take in California, is now civilized. But can anybody see a connection between that and man's level of consciousness? Continuing to move up, not just man, how about you individually? That sometime in the past, X number of months ago, there were areas wherein I was, in a sense, disorganized, even uncivilized. I had nightmares that frightened me. I had apparent desires to do things that I was afraid someday I might get drunk enough or deranged enough and actually do them. And that's as though civilization caught up with you. It got over the Appalachians. But then the frontier must continue to move. I say must, it does move. Those who understand would qualify under my original comment, must move. During the general feudal area, and even the era, don't write me, of European history, There was a comment, if I am translating it correctly, and if I'm not, don't write me because I'm making it up anyway, so I translate it any way I want to. But there was a general sentiment that was expressed, and it had to do with the fact, I guess somewhere prior to 1300 in general, where France and some of the Germanic tribes really began to stabilize into real kingdoms with a leader, what passed off for being kings and rulers were not, according to some history, much history, were not what shows up in Hollywood movies, that they were constantly strapped for money, and that they had to almost every year, and it seemed to be springtime, like gets us all, was the time that suddenly the Lord would call upon all the vessels that he had available and say, we got to go fight somebody. And he'd come up with some story, him or somebody. Well, these folks over here are not Christians. Have you noticed all these people start growing beards? St. Peter didn't have a beard. We got to go get them. They'd come up with something. But I'm suggesting to you, and some historians even agree with me, so what? But that they continually had to do this to go and plunder. That's before they caught on to taxation. But they continued to have to fight. And of course, all their knights and their vessels, they got paid off by everything you can steal once I get through with the town. Once I pillage it, me and my men, then you get everything that's left. You got there in the more rural areas. At any rate, it was such an accepted thing that it is said that there was a little gem of wisdom amongst these would-be kings and leaders who were almost as poor as everybody else. And that was in relationship to the fact that they had to continually fight, that was the only time that they were flush. That was the only time that they could really get down, as royalty is wont to do, and rock and roll as God meant for them to do. But other than these times of continual warfare, which obviously, or you should say obviously, couldn't be actually continually. But other than those times, they had this term: poverty follows peace. That's the way I'm going to translate it for you. It was somewhat similar to that. That would have been true, and was true, taking the descriptions I'm relaying to you, at a horizontal level. That during that era, when things were peaceful, the would-be leaders, the little kings and the barons and the lords, were just as broke as everyone else. That peace was not desirable. They could not, as I said, before taxation, before somebody came up with that idea, at least enough to be able to enforce it, that poverty followed peace. Can anybody think of any reason, any possible reason that I would even bring this up? Well, when the frontiers were being pushed, and we had here the civilized area, over to where my first line was drawn, and here's the Wild West, the frontier. Then over here, past that, as I pointed out, was disorganized, uncivilized, whereas back here, it was civilized, organized, stable. It was peaceful. Why did they keep pushing? And don't give me the old answers, well, it was there. You can come up with any answer. You can cut up the infinite comment of reality, and it's not that you or anyone else would be wrong. You can say, well, the space was here, more and more people was immigrating, and so they kept pushing. Remember, this is just one example. This was true all over the planet. I'm just using the so-called civilizing of the North American continent by the European settlers into what was known now as the United States of America. But they kept pushing. Because peace produces poverty, and not necessarily limited to some commercial, some institutional definition of poverty. But it's a fact that poverty follows peace. And yet, I asked you originally tonight, why do we continue to meet? Why do you continue to come here? And I, using words, I point out, or rhetorically point out several possibilities, like, do you come here for, you think, for enlightenment, fellowship, comfort, peace? And many people, if they were given to just say whatever their own response would have been, many people would have felt that, well, peace is a desirable goal. In fact, I do feel more peaceful having been involved with this, no matter how strange I talk and push you around at times, that I feel much more peaceful. I suggest you make a mistake to believe that the few are completely immune from that which governs the many. Poverty follows peace. How about let's take the three prime examples in the Western part of this planet, Western history, the three prime examples of what seems to be non-temporal kicks in life's ass, as produced apparently by Moses, Muhammad, and Jesus. Looked at from one viewpoint, not an incorrect one. I'm not simply playing, I'm just taking history as you've all heard it, which is fine with me. I may know better if I'm not getting paid for history lessons. What did all three of them have in common? They were all troublemakers. Now, you may think you've heard that, but I'm talking about seriously. Just take history as you know it, of Moses showing up and the people. Forget the little problem of them. The story, I believe, from the Old Testament in general is that they were in bondage, that they were slaves of the Egyptians. Boy, what a shock. For those of you, surely you remember a little history. Back then, everybody was a slave of somebody. But for him to suddenly get there, and that was the highest civilization according to history. And again, I'm just taking history as it's remembered at the horizontal level. That was the highest civilization at the time. Everybody, except Numbers Pogita. There's only a very few people could be said to have been kings or princes. Everybody was slaves of somebody. And here Moses was a group. He was slaves of the richest, finest civilization on the planet. And what did he do? He started telling the people, we got to get out of here. What did Muhammad do? What did Jesus do? In a sense, I'm not going to give you a more even horizontal history. In a real sense, they stepped into a reasonably, no matter what you think you've heard before, they stepped into a reasonably peaceful situation. That's where they were. When I say stepped in, they were born there, that's where they were, but then they suddenly stepped in, that is, they actively, such as Moses saying, hey, we don't have to put up with this crap, let's go somewhere else. Take the stories you know it, they left the height of Western civilization, and what? They wandered around for years and years in the desert and almost died. But I suggest to you that in their own way, they understood. Peace produces poverty. Poverty follows peace. I don't know why this comes to mind, but does anybody ever hear me when I periodically say that you should be continually doing something, even if it's irrelevant, even if it's useless, like learning how to do, learning how? Getting to where you can do 50 push-ups first thing in the morning. Men, women, intellectuals, learning how. If any of you need to learn how, we'll find the book and I'll send it to you. But to do something useless that there's no need to do. You'll have to forgive me. I don't know why sometimes I just go off the subject and just, I know it has nothing to do with what we're talking about, so let's see, what was I talking about? Poverty follows peace. That was it. I'll try to stay on the subject. Would not many people, or if I tried to present something more publicly in a certain way, do you not think that many people would be attracted if I or somebody, come to think about it, they're already doing it. But if we said, here is something that will bring you peace. We have some kind of message, we have some kind of teaching now. We have a system here, methods, things to do, things to try, things to think about, ways to try to feel, ways in which to affect your behavior that will make you more peaceful. Not make you feel more guilty, not make you feel more agitated, not to make you feel more fearful, but to actually bring about increased, real peace. Not an illusionary peace, not some peace based on so-called faith and an afterlife, but right now to be more at peace with life and with yourself. Would not people, or should not people go, yay, yay, where'd I sign up? Is it not a worthwhile aim, endeavor, except for this? If I'm telling you the truth, if those kings of old were correct, that poverty follows peace. Are you going to get to a frontier? Is it possible that the frontier moves and that you in some way catch up? And phew, I'm even more peaceful than I was when the frontier line was back 2 or 3 degrees of latitude. Longitude. Don't write me. How hard it is to do something new. Now there, I'm getting off the subject. I did it again. Damn it. That's what I was talking about. Oh, poverty follows peace. That was it. How about the way people attack religion? I'm not talking about me using it as examples, but people attacking religion. Point out that religions, the so-called great religions, are dead. That you walk into a great cathedral somewhere, could be thousands of years old, a beautiful work of art. Well, not thousands of years old, don't write me. 1,500 years old, a great cathedral. And you walk in and these little old women, Italian, French, and these little old priests, men who supposedly never even had any, trying to do great work. And there's all these smells and candles and all this going on, and in some way you as a contemporary man or woman could look upon this and say, it's not a completely disinteresting ritualistic display of history, but it's meaningless. There's nothing going on here. It's dead. It's not near as good as civil mind control or chanting or smoking dope. There's nothing to it. It's just a shell. Poverty follows peace. I've even heard or read that some priest or cardinal in his cups, perhaps, has even pointed out that if Jesus himself came back to earth and showed up at the Vatican, they'd throw him out. And he thought that was funny in a kind of a crude way. It's funny, and it ain't so funny. But all of you should know. As far as you can take three-dimensional words, that is a fact. He would get the old bum's rush. Now, of course, if this figure, supposedly Jesus, did come back, and he came back like he was, he wouldn't try to get in. If he came back, if he understood originally that poverty follows peace, he wouldn't bother to get in. I mean, assuming he came back to pick up where he left off or to start all over or to do it again at a different time and place, he'd do the same thing he did before in some way. He'd be out there rattling the cage of the Vatican. And everybody, even if you temporarily said, all right, I accept the fact that maybe there are no verbal cosmic truths, but still there's got to be some kind of immediate something to do. There's got to be some kind of shortcut, or there's got to be some kind of secret you can tell me. And I've told you some secrets. One of them is don't do the same thing twice. But goddamn, that's nearly impossible. And it's not because of you. It's not because you're too weak. It's not because that I haven't talked to you enough. It's not that at all. But it's almost impossible. What are you going to do, You're going to start dropping your pants in the middle of intersections? You're going to wear nose and glasses? You're wearing nose and glasses once or twice, then you forget you got them on. You take them off, and you look in the mirror, and you look funny, and you put them back on. If you want to do something extraordinary, you got to do something extraordinary. If you want something extraordinary to happen in your life, you got to do something extraordinary. That is it's somewhere between difficult and distasteful for me to put it in those kind of words. Because I cannot, for one thing, give you a personal example to follow. Because in a sense I didn't have to do it, and it's irrelevant. That's why I've periodically point out that I don't use me, and you're not supposed to assume that I'm some kind of perfect example to follow. We'd have to be ordinary for that to happen, because in a sense, for whatever reason we're not going into, I didn't have to go through that. Now, it may or may not be true, but just accept it. So there's nothing personally that I can show you, like any good preacher, any good religious leader should do. As you know, all decent ones have got some story that I either grew up poor and undernourished and mistreated, and I wandered about the world trying to find a spiritual master, and then I found him or her and such happened. Or on the contrary, I grew up with a silver Coke spoon in my mouth, and I had it made, and then I fell into errant ways, and I almost destroyed myself while having everything, and then while in a great moment of despair, the Lord's and the forces opened my eyes, and I saw the truth, and I made extraordinary effort, and now here I am. What's this? Stand back. They all got that story. Of course, I should, or I will, add just parenthetically again, some of the stories that you may have heard were not necessarily put forth by the people involved, that they happen after the fact. But at any rate, that's what you'd normally expect, because that is what is normally tied to it. But as all of you will note, none of you have been non-privy to any kind of story. There is no such story. But on your own remains the fact that if anything extraordinary is going to happen, really, you've got to do something extraordinary. Insofar as the extraordinary, inasmuch as I went far enough to even say whether I meant it literally or not, I didn't have any story to tell you or any example to give. As long as I went that far, whether it be true or not, let me say that that's not necessarily completely true, even if it's not true to start with, or even if it is true to start with, in that it could have been the extraordinary thing was simply holding on. And there could be a piece of that involved with some of you. But holding on becomes a positive, active condition that you can't let. If life in some way seems to have made you one of the, what do we call it, one of the chosen ones. I like that. Write that down. One of the chosen ones, if it does that, then imagine life's going to try to push you around. And the thing is, you can't put up with that kind of shit, and I've told you that before. No, it can push you around, make you sick, and it can kill you. And it can make banks, up the interest rate and all that stuff. But in the same way that, if any of you remember, I told you once, if you'd known what you're doing, it was too late unless you knew how to change time now. All of you, if you'd start off on the right foot, you wouldn't have let your parents push you around. By the time you got old enough to think, you would have begun to frighten them. So that them and then rabbis and ministers and teachers, that nobody would have fucked with you in a certain way. But it's too late for that, right? But the extraordinary thing could be simply holding on. In a sense, I'll give you this much credit, a lot of you have held on, even those of you that think you haven't done enough, or those of you that think enough magic has not happened, thanks to yours truly, that you have held on. But every time, by any measure that you may enumerate and verbalize to yourself, or whether it just be a vague sensation, of every time there has been a movement of the frontier and you now seem more civilized, or have it your way, I now feel like I'm more conscious, I now feel like I'm more of a full person, I'm now more civilized than I was previously. Big deal. There is always, there's got to be, a frontier just past this. And right over that line, you may be civilized now. And you may have pushed, not only from the Jersey shore, into the Pennsylvanias, into the mountains, over into the Ohio region, then even through Indiana, even maybe out into the plains, and not that far, you have now dragged or had shipped to you chandeliers. Of course, you know I'm speaking allegorically as always, except for those times when I'm not. You have had chandeliers, great books of the Western world, dictionaries, silver. And now, even out in places you never expected you would be, at the edge of the Kansas territory now, surrounded by possibly still relatively, speaking allegorically as always, except for those times when I'm not. You have had chandeliers, great books of the Western world, dictionaries, silver. And now, even out in places you never expected you would be, at the edge of the Kansas territory now, surrounded by possibly still relatively uncouth peoples. Here you are, and your little realm is now civilized. A decent house, aluminum siding. The accoutrements, don't write me, of civilization. But you got to remember that right down the road, just a few miles, is Dodge City, wherein people are dipping stuff and spitting on the floor, drinking out of bottles. But there you sit now, that it's surprising the kind of crap I've had to go through to get here. And you turn to someone next to you and say, "Dear, do you remember how we sliced through the mud, how the wheels kept breaking on our wagon, how we had to save to get isinglass to go in the windows, how we never thought that we'd get these great books sent in their imported bindings, but now look, here we sit, but off in the distance, oh, you can manage to ignore it, have another drink, but off in the distance, if you hear good, is the sound of the rowdies. Right down the street, a few miles away, is the frontier. Not linen, no great books. There may even be no literates in town. They're hooping it up, pinching women on the ass or otherwise. They're drinking. They're disorderly. But isn't it nice to sit here? I have earned this. Of course, everybody believes I've earned this. As you people know, on a lucid day, they didn't earn it. They don't even know how they got there. But anyway, they have a drink and think, I have earned it. Who would tolerate somebody, I don't know who it would be, a stepson, a bastard stepson, somebody come in and say, hey, this is getting too peaceful. Why don't we abandon the house, or at least sometimes, All right, let's just close this damn place up. Get in the wagon again. It's still outside. We can get the wheels cranked back up, grease them up. Let's leave all this and move over to Dodge City where the real fun is. And now you sit and you think, Jesus Christ, you got to be kidding. I'm now 25 years old, 35, 45. I have paid my dues. Of course, some of you understand that I am not talking about Dodge City and the plains. And they said poverty follows peace. You do understand that poverty is slow death. And look how peaceful some of you feel compared to what you were. Look how orderly it seems that week after week after fucking week, I pace back and forth. I dress up and take a shower. We bought these TV camera. This equipment. I send them out to other cities. New people show up in the other cities, and you seriously sit down. You turn on your set, and everybody's quiet, and you watch me. The wisdom for the week. How much better you feel now than you did 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago. You walk down the streets of Manhattan, even walk down the streets of San Diego. In the midst of all this, you feel a certain kind of stability compared to before. Apparently, you can look on your fellow man running around like fellow men with their heads cut off. People out killing themselves, the stress of trying to get rich, and you can somewhat, in a relatively spiritual manner, you can sort of chuckle. The cars flying by in traffic, salesmen with their cases running around with their samples, everybody trying to get rich, and you feel as though, compared to them, I do know a little secret. I know parts of many secrets. I'm much more peaceful. My ulcers have quit bleeding. I no longer have to take Valium. I no longer drink. Poverty. Well, on the list of other topics that people write me about, I lied to you as always. The number one topic is people want to hear me confess and talk about myself. That's the number one topic. So here goes. Is I didn't have to read somewhere of some alleged king in the early Middle Ages say that poverty follows peace. No, I've known that a long time. Life knows that, I know that. Life knows that I know that. I know that life knows that I know that. So, we have what is known in John Ford movies as a real situation. It is the kind of thing that where the denizens of Dodge City, a little more philosophically bent, would bring about trouble. Of course, we do know what it did in River City. But in Dodge City, for that to be known, and for it to be known that it's known, this activity, and I'm saying this, I'm talking about me, and anybody still involved with it, it continues to reach a place. And we're at it again. Of course, I can say this at any time, but I'm saying it for some reason right now. It gets rather peaceful. I repeat, I could say this anytime, because to somebody, as long as you've got a minimal number of people fairly seriously involved with this, then somebody, it's true for at any given moment, that they have had the silver shipped out, got some good books, got some decent recordings finally, Mozart, Beethoven, a couple of pieces of silverware, and you would drink to the health of me in this activity, whatever the hell it is, I feel so much better. I am not nearly as agitated. Poverty is slow death. If it's peaceful, you're only one step away from poverty. The kingdom will starve. It's not just the leaders go hungry. It's not just those would-be Saxony and Frank kings at that time, or whatever they tried to call themselves, lords and barons. They went hungry. But everybody went hungry. In peacetime, there was only one solution. You had to go to war. There was only one solution. There's only one thing that made life become livable again. It's like a Mohammed, a Moses show up. I repeat, regardless of what you thought you had heard and read about horizontal history, things were relatively peaceful. Believe me, things are always relatively peaceful. You just think you read back that here it was, Huns overrunning the Roman Empire, those decent, civilized, upstanding, patrician, forward-thinking people, and here it is, all these crude suckers come in and, as history says, sack the place, loot, pillage the so-called, catch this, Dark Ages. They were peaceful, relatively speaking. Relatively speaking, things are always peaceful. You just think that you read back in history. When the world was in a turmoil, when things were cruder, things are always relatively peaceful. And people are starving. People are dying. And somebody like a Moses or Muhammad suddenly takes these people. They're minding their own business. His own people. That's where they always start, in the midst of people that know them. And they start turning around and say, hey, we can't put up with this shit anymore. And at first people say, what shit? They say, you don't understand the oppression. You don't understand the slings and arrows of the Philistines, the cruder sorts, the oppressors. How long are we going to put up with this? And the people at first go, what? But then when life needs it, suddenly, so it seems, got a whole bunch of people that have taken up the cry. We ain't going to put up with this crap anymore. There's still a whole lot of those same people going, what crap? What crap? Can any of you see in a certain way, taking those three outstanding horizontal figures, those described eras of human history of Muhammad, and Moses, and Jesus, that they took a relatively stable, peaceful people and time and got them involved with, dare I say this, almost a useless endeavor, but on a very large scale. Moses didn't talk all these people into, hey, let's everybody get to where we can do 50 push-ups. I mean everybody, even you old people. Nah. He said, let's all get out of here and go somewhere else. You know, follow me, we're going out in the desert. We're going to march for years, trust me. And for some reason, life was arranged in such a way, after, as the story goes, a whole bunch of problems with the poor Pharaoh, that he finally said, you know, the hell with you people. And they thought, now we got it. Moses said, I told you to trust me. And then for years and years, there was no longer peace. There was no longer poverty. Dust, blood, guts. According to the histories, a non-ending series of faux pas, problems. I guess it'd be silly for us to wonder how many of those people that followed him, after a little while of that, thought, Jesus, I wonder if the Pharaoh would let us back. I'm sure that couldn't be true. But how about this large group of people involved with, as I'm suggesting to you from a certain very real view, in an absolutely useless endeavor? I mean, sure, it had a name according to history. We're going to the promised land. The gods have talked to me and said that we don't have to put up with this crap, that there's this beautiful place. So they finally stopped. History doesn't seem to, in the Bible, go into a great deal about how many people, once they got there, went, hey, you were right, this is great. But for years was this story, we're going somewhere. And now we're going nowhere, walking around in circles. What is the difference between silliness and gigantic folly? Learning how to do 50 push-ups, or following some questionably stable man who jumps up and says, we got to get out of here, follow me, we're going to a promised land. And then walk around in circles and eat dust for years and years and years. There's a lot of difference, isn't there? Well, one difference is, if I said, all right, look, trust me, you have got to learn through your own effort to do 50 push-ups that fast, non-stop. Men, women, or you especially, you got to do it. Now, there's obviously a difference between that and hundreds of thousands of people following a guy walking around in circles in the desert for 20 years, right? Right. The difference is hundreds of thousands of people doing that as opposed to one person doing push-ups. Numbers do make a difference, but if you think that there is a quantitative difference between hundreds of thousands of people following a guy around in a desert and you learning how to do 50 push-ups for absolutely no reason, then I'm not sure you got the right apparatus. This kind of activity, and this kind of bloodletting, blood-producing river comes above ground. If it turns into peace, then it turns into poverty, and it peters out. It does not go out in any bang, and it does not serve the most useful purpose. How many examples can you people think of from your reading of history and even into contemporary times of groups of people that apparently were involved? I always had a leader. You always got to have a leader. There seems to be a group of people involved with a would-be mystical, transcendental effort of some kind. It doesn't matter who. And how many of them eventually run absolutely amok of the powers that be? They seem to run head-on. In the past, it was normally they run head-on into the world of the gods, that is, the prevailing religions. Nowadays, it's more common for them to run headlong into the world of Caesar, as it used to be called, that is, the temporal governments, that they seem to just go too far. They try to set up a commune or somebody somewhere. It can happen right today in almost any part of life's body on this planet. That a person's apparently some sort of spiritual, religious, transcendental prophet of some kind, apparently involved with dispensing cosmic truths. And nowadays, it's pretty difficult to get in trouble with the world of God on this planet. I mean, if you're inside a religion, the Holy See, the Catholic Church from the Vatican can certainly disbar a priest and take away his pantyhose and all of that. But nowadays, it is hard, it's almost impossible to actually run directly amok with the so-called, the erstwhile world of God on this planet. If you follow what I'm saying, you can get out there and holler, hey, there is no God, and if there was a God, his name would be Larry, and he would wear a bow tie. If you're going to wait for the Pope or the rabbi in charge of the southeastern United States or Jimmy Swiggart's minions, if you're going to wait for somebody to say, hey, you can't do that, you know by nowadays you can do almost anything. But those same people nowadays the most or more common possibility is they run amok of the erstwhile called world of Caesar. They try to set up a commune, and they start annoying neighbors. They start disregarding zonings codes. They get in trouble with the IRS. The reason I went to all that, which was too much time, was to show you that even at the crudest, most mechanical level, that is where this kind of river, this fabled river, just seeps up a little bit, there's just a little spark of this kind of enriched blood driving some so-called prophet, some guru, some teacher, and some group around him. Even at the lowest level, it's either just going to peter out, it's just going to die of poverty, in which case you probably didn't even hear of it. Or it may have made the papers one time. It might have got covered one time on a news broadcast somewhere about this strange group of people right outside of Oklahoma City believe that God is a man called Larry and wears a bow tie. And you might hear that, and it's on for 30 seconds, and they show the group of people all sitting there with bow ties and holding it. And you go, wow, you know, how funny. And that's it. You never hear about it again unless somebody brought it up 20 years later and you went, didn't somebody cover it on the news? Somebody can remember that. Whatever happened to those people? Who knows? Nothing happened was the point. They povertied to death. It's either that or there has to be a kind of warfare, even at the most crude level, which is the only reason I went through all those examples and my imaginary scenarios, that at the very least they'll run afoul of the IRS. That's the way life operates. It's not because they were dumb. And it's not because, as some psychologists might state, that many of these people who believe that they have a spiritual mission, somewhere in their psyche is a kind of self-fulfilling dream of martyrdom. And sure enough, almost all of them fuck up in some way. And the psychologist strokes his beard and says, I believe I'm onto something. Well, he is, insofar as cutting up the infinite comment, and as his observations are not incorrect. But the reality of it is, if it's not going to be a poverty, cum death situation, even at the crudest levels, and by that I mean where the blood, where the river is almost groundwater, where the MV12 exists perhaps for a second, and this sparks the whole affair. The affair may go on for another 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. If it does not just die out through poverty, then the closest they get to the enriching, profitable activity of real warfare is simply having the IRS finally sell all their belongings. Maybe they get the head guy and they find out he's been married 3 times and everybody get divorced, and they throw him in jail where he has to leave town. That's it. That, as you might suspect, forget any of your partnership's ideas of morality and etc. That's irrelevant. But as you might suspect correctly, that is less than optimally profitable. Life does it many, many times, but that is not the way in which life really uses this. This is not, or those are not the times that this fabled river shows up and has any force to it. When it does, I suggest to you, is the possibility of when these people, these so-called historical horizontal figures like a Buddha, a Muhammad, a Jesus, a Moses, seem to show up and get large numbers of people involved with a kind of warfare. And in a very particular way, as I'm trying to get you to see, in a sense, an irrelevant warfare, a useless warfare. But it's either that or peace and then poverty. And everybody starves to death. If there is pressing, immediate validity to what I'm talking about again, and I've talked about this before in case some of you think it's brand new, then the question should be, how exactly should the blood be stirred up at any time and place? How should the warfare be instigated? And many people, if they followed it all, they thought verbally what I'm talking about, would think, hey, that's no problem. Give me 2 minutes. Let me just open my mouth and I'll tell you how to do it. And you're as wrong as Harold Stassen. It is not that easy. You can put on nose and glasses and try and stick your tongue out if what you think are the prevailing powers and go. But to jump right back into non-allegorical or supra-allegorical streams, I could say, or ask you, what good would it do if pepping the fat, realizing that the coffers were empty again, and that he couldn't rock and roll as a good king or would-be king should, and he walked over to whatever the boundaries were back then, looked over at some of the Anglo-Saxons around the campfire, and hollered, hey, you guys. I'm not sure that got the job done. You had to mobilize people. You had to round up some serfs, some peons, some vassals. And you had to give them pots and pans or knives or sticks or something. You had to get a whole bunch of them. And you didn't go over to some other group and go. And to jump back from the allegorical or the non-allegorical to right now, as I was pointing out to you, you go out right now and sit on the street corner and say, I have been reading up and I now consider myself to be an expert on Judaism, and to that I say, I have now studied and read every available book on the history of the Catholic Church, and my opinion is, you people are sophisticated enough, especially in the bastions of real civilization like Long Island and College Park and Encino. You know that's not going to get you anywhere. I could suggest to you this verbally, but let me tell you beforehand that this is misspeak, because this is truly 2/3 of an idea. But listen, it sounds correctly. It sounds correct. Don't write me. That I could say, as we have become more civilized and sophisticated, the harder it is to stage war. That is, the harder it is to insult some group. The harder it is to stir people. All you've got to do in any decent-sized metropolitan area now is turn on your AM radio in the early morning hours, and you hear people under the guise of being preachers, political commentators, saying things that 20 years ago they would have been arrested for, perhaps. They would have been ostracized. They might have been put in a home. But nowadays you can say almost anything. Not just legally, but you can just say it, and if you're waiting for a crowd to join up, if you're going to go out and say, I have proof positive. In fact, I have better than proof positive. I have people from another planet have told me, and they have sent me some pictures and some information, and I can prove beyond any doubt that Gerald Ford's brother-in-law and Henry Kissinger came originally from another planet, and they have been given secret powers to cloud men's minds and make us all more and more want to vote in a conservative, nay, Republican manner. And this goes against, let me read from you here right in Deuteronomy 7:14, where it speaks out against voting a straight conservative ticket. That God said, woe be unto the people who vote Republican. At any rate, something like that, you can turn on your radio and hear that going on nowadays. It's nothing. So, some of you people might respond when I said, They point out that it would get harder and harder to stage a real warfare, the kind that would feed life, the kind that would continue to enrich the blood that's behind such as this, that some of you inside your partnership might at first think about as being some kind of either quality question or quantity question. That we have either got to find exactly the right quality. And of course you would think the right quality from a sequential line of thought and feeling and reaction, that the right line to start trouble is what? Is you attack the status quo. That you do attack the church. You do attack the established norms. You do attack our society as it is. But I just got through pointing out to you, and you should know what I'm saying, it's harder and harder to be new wave, to be religiously punk. What can you do that's that much offensive anymore? What can you do to look over the line at those Germanic, those Anglo-Saxon brutes, where you might finally stir up some problems? What can you do? You go, holler, na 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 na, or holler, you old, and then call them some name. It's getting harder and harder to do. And then some of you might think it's a matter of quantity. That, all right, maybe calling somebody a name, maybe going, I have seen you people's society, I've seen what you believe, and I say double. That maybe once or twice won't get it, but we'll get several hundred people, and we'll all line up and go, and I'll get it. Are you sure? Some of these people that I was mentioning, they're proclaiming very, you might say, from a majority view, proclaiming very strange notions about what's going on. Many of them have hundreds of thousands of so-called followers that are in a sense are going to the norm, to some mainstream line of religious or social thought, and yet you don't know who they are. Or if you do accidentally catch them on the radio, you listen for a couple of seconds and go and turn it on off and try to find a radio version of Wheel of Fortune. How is one to feed oneself? How is one to feed this? The story of Moses was that he called down food from the heavens, which would seem just enough to take the story as it was, that he claimed the heavens, that some God outside the system itself, at least outside the immediate system of Egypt and the Sinai desert, to call down and said, hey, get all these people to where they'll go do 20 years of nonstop push-ups. So he whipped up enough of them and they started doing it. And in the story, accidentally, you might say, serendipitously, then says that from the same source, food came down and kept them from starving. I guess up until now, I guess everybody's always taken that story, such stories, that was literally true. They're out there in the desert. There was no Edelman's Discount House, day-old bread, no McDonald's. The land was not fit for cultivation, even if they'd stopped long enough. And so it seemed rather apropos that food comes from the same source that got them all agitated, according to Moses. But I'm suggesting to you to jump from the allegorical to the reality of it. There's not a matter of some kind of physical, material food. It's how do you continue to feed the very thing that agitated you to start with? How do you continue to feed that which you cannot even necessarily describe now as to why you're involved with this? How can I continue to feed enough to stop people from becoming peaceful? How can I feed it enough for me to let the border just stop and it all becomes civilized? I'm sure that Shakespeare, if not Genesis and Abraham and St. John of the Roebuck, somebody had something to say on this, but at this particular moment I can't recall what it was. But there was, no. It was at that famous, it was an 18th century philosopher. Now, I can't remember exactly what he said now, and I can't remember his name, but no matter. Don't write me and tell me who it was and when he lived. If you don't know blatant humor by now, well, perhaps it's not your fault. Maybe my delivery is still lacking. But then again, I never practice. And then again, I'm insincere with it. Then again, I'm not union. And then again, I don't have the opportunity to go to the comedy shop and catch a rising star and all that place and break in the material. I just have to do it. There is one thing you got to admit about humor, at least I will, that sure can take the edge off when you feel like you're about to fall over somewhere. All I got to do is make a joke. All I got to do is mispronounce something and say, hey, don't write me. Well, at least that's good for tonight. That's probably good for another couple of weeks. Or I can drop it and pull it out 6 months from now. Get to the point that things, I don't like the way this is going. I just do something silly. And then say, don't write me. Or say, why did I say that? Well, I don't know why I thought this. Well, get off the subject for a minute. Where was I? I shouldn't have to preach sermons. I shouldn't preach sermons. I don't want to preach sermons. But the truth is, everybody, continually, and there's a reason I'm doing it again tonight, you and me, I am subject to it. This whole activity is always subject to it, becomes poverty-stricken. You feel it. You never use such terms. You write me or you say to yourself, how come I've lost my enthusiasm? Why do I feel on some meeting nights that I don't want to go? Why is it sometimes I can listen to you talk and it seems like it'll charge me up for 2 or 3 days, and other times I sit there and listen and I think this is just insanity. Or I've heard all this before and it didn't do any good then. It's poverty. It is a weakening of the blood. It is a group of people, literally. And don't make any more of this than I'm telling you. But this is a fact. As things become peaceful and you become us, this activity, here and now, other places, other times, it is like a group of people, and peace has caught up with them. They become inbred. If you think that warfare has not served a purpose and does serve a purpose on this planet, you are sadly mistaken. I keep hinting and talking around the edges of it. It's not to saying, of course, the beauties of warfare by any means, because the whole descriptions, all of it is only a 2/3 reflection of what's really going on. But the old ideas that heaven, or at least progress in human affairs, would be the cessation of all hostilities. You are one of the many. You should have yourself a mini bell. You at least ought to have a card so that the rest of them will know that, hey, I'm okay. I was weird for a while, but I'm back with you folks. A group of people, and some of you probably read this, not from me, from ordinary people. People with college education, guys that finished high school and wrote books. Not like my old, flim-flam books. I'm talking about real books that were published in New York and places, with introductions by famous people from other famous places that have pointed out that, in their opinion, theories, as some people like to call it in New York and other famous places, that there have been societies, civilizations that seem to be strong, full of vigor, new ideas, and they get too peaceful, and over a period of time, it's like their muscle tone goes, their inventiveness goes. And those fine, upstanding Roman people with noses, the way God meant for them to have noses, did all these great things, such as beating up on the Greeks, but did all these great things, and then what happened? All these crude sorts, whose name ended in Goth, come sweeping down on them on motorcycles And after these hundreds of years of the Roman Empire building aqueducts and aqueduct racetracks, Pimlico, having public baths, running water, pornography, everything that makes a civilization great, literature, art, music. And then it's like they became soft. The Pax Roman. And what happened? That's not me talking. This is your history books. They got peaceful. Idyllic times. The greatest peace that had been known up until that time as far as written history. A certain amount of real justice. A kind of common law spread around most of the known Western world. Religious tolerance. And then what happened? These crude bunch of guys named Goths picking their nose. No glass in their houses. Not even a regular settlement. They came in and just overran them. Burned down all these fine buildings, tore up art. Somebody tried to point out to them after years and years, or days and days, or even hours and hours even, of looting, raping, plundering, tearing down 500 years of civilization. Just burned it down, tore it down, knocked it all over, and some Roman, some guy left somewhere, there they're all staying around, pissing in the campfire, picking their teeth with some famous art object, and some Roman finally, in his dying breath, said, how could you, people come down here and just overnight, just in a few hours, tear down 500 years of civilization, the height of Western civilization? And one of the Goths goes, what? What? Huh? That's your history. That's ordinary history. And yet people believe that we have got to do away with these feelings of antagonism, of aggression. If we don't, man is doomed. Now, I just read that quote. I can't remember what somebody said last week or whether that was one of the things I was reading in history. No, that was BC. That's strange. I just thought about that. It was almost the same thing, but never mind. There is poverty, just like camp followers, following peace, not warfare. It is not like the regular camp followers and the kind of women who dress in a gaudy manner and have fun at night. Following peace are camp followers that are nothing but poverty and starvation, and yet it seems peaceful. Back to my original question, since I had no point to all this. Why are we meeting here? What was it you thought you were looking for? Why have you stuck around me this long? What is it you think you're getting? What do you think has happened to you? What do you hope is going to happen to you if you keep this up or if you just hang around? In some way, all of you, you're wired up. Your electronic chemical response would have been in some fashion to become more peaceful. Some of you would have even pushed it further, that you wanted to become more loving. You wanted to become more spiritual. And spiritual, of course, breaks down into such things as being peaceful, being non-aggressive. It all sounds fine, but I'm telling you, no, I'm not telling you. I just started out recounting what I'd read, that Saxony Prince, or whoever the hell it was, saying that poverty follows peace. But isn't it nice to be peaceful? Isn't it nice, compared to what you were at one time, that now you're no longer that concerned about being rich and famous? Far be it from me to even give the appearance of being sarcastic. Say I as humor, since many of you fall into the hands of your own partnership and think that I say that just an excuse to be sarcastic. Shows how much you know. How about if success, ordinary success, if wealth, but if ordinary success is the real, if it proves to be the real gauge, the real standard of a life well spent, no sarcasm yet, I'm not hinting one thing, but if, as everybody has felt at one time, you may be beyond it now, you say, but if success here in life, including wealth, everything that goes with it, if that would be a proper gauge for a life well spent, how many of you can face up to the right quick, immediate fact that historical statistics portend very, very few winners? So it's easy enough to say, in your own confines of your own partnership, back in your own little boardroom somewhere, that's B-O-A-R-D, I think. Well, at any rate, boardroom, I know, is the way it's pronounced. Any of you that believe that at one time, yes, I too was caught up into wanting to be successful. I mean, I wanted to be rich. But all right, something in me led me in other pursuits such as this. It's all right. In fact, I feel better. I'm more peaceful. I don't worry about it anymore. I'm probably going to live the rest of my life dressing from Kmart and driving an old car. And to tell you the truth, I'm as peaceful now, I'm more peaceful than I ever was. Big deal. I guess it's a big deal for Kresge Corporation and used car lots. But what people will not face up to, that if that was a fair standard for many people, for most people, of this would have been a good life had I been successful, if I am now successful. Don't worry too much. Don't be too mechanically pleased that you think you've gotten over it. Because people do not ordinarily, they can't face up to the fact that historically there's enough statistics, there's data everywhere, you're surrounded by it, that tells you there's going to be few people then ever happy. The chances of you having ever been one of them are what? Well, I'm glad I got over that. Well, you can be glad that you got over it, or you can be not glad you got over it. How many wealthy people are there on this planet, if that was a decent gauge? And still notice I hadn't put my tongue in my cheek, I haven't sneered. If being wealthy, I'll give time out a few seconds again, everybody think about it. I'm talking about wealthy. You know, like $1 million a day above whatever your taxes would be. Coming in each and every day, 7 days a week. Why not? Think about that. You going to tell me that you couldn't have fun? You going to tell me that you couldn't enjoy that? You couldn't tell me that you'd give it your best shot to enjoy that? Any feeling that you have of, well, in some way I've gotten over that, or I've gotten freed from that kind of mundane, routine, probably unprofitable desire. I say again, that's really a big deal. You can be pleased, as you say, that you got over it, or you can be not pleased, and I'm pointing out to you, what the hell's the difference? How many people are that rich? Nowadays, through mass communication, I guess you can watch enough TV shows about rich and famous people, or read enough articles in Forbes or Business Week or whatever it is, and get the impression that almost everybody, not everybody of course, but about every third or fourth person is probably, it's not making $1 million a day, they're making $1 million a week now. You may not know any because now you associate with people like in this group. And most of them are dressing from Kmart and driving cars as beat up as yours and mine is, which shows that we're spiritual people and we're not caught up in that kind of delusion. I tell you again, you can say, well, I'm glad I'm not any longer caught up in those kind of deluded dreams, or you can not be. What difference does it make? Every other person, every 10th person is not rich on this planet, in this country. And yet, everybody has a certain feeling, as I started out hinting to you, even those of you now in the sound of my voice that believe that you have in some way progressed spiritually beyond the hold, the delusion that some kind of success, wealth in this life would have been an experienced gauge of a life well spent. It would have been the game to have played, the only one available. That you've got beyond that you understand that this game is the real game, the game to expand one's consciousness, to help preserve, to straighten out one's soul. And that now you can say, well, I'm glad that I found this is the true purpose. And I'm glad I didn't go ahead and waste my life getting rich. The chances of you having gotten rich, almost nil. Not because of you personally. The statistics are there of you being successful. So you can say forever, well, I'm glad I got beyond that. You can be glad or not glad. Historically, life has put out the statistics, the information is there, that the chances of you getting rich, the chances of you being successful, we're talking about successful with a big old S, in some field, are just almost nil. The chances of you being a famous Broadway dancer, singer, the chance of you being a famous recording artist, the chance of you being a famous painter, the chances of you writing a book, a philosophically inclined novel or whatever, and putting you on everyone's lips, and you'll be on all the talk shows, and your next book brings in a $2 million advance. Now, I'm not trying to give you the blues. I'm asking you to face up that you cannot see, you and everybody else, the statistical facts. Life puts it out. You don't need some statistical abstract put out by the government in arcane language. You just look around and feel it. The chance of that happening to you is about that. It always has been. There's only royalty, and I'm using that in the broadest sense of the term, the rich, the powerful, the successful, the rock and roll kings. At any time on this planet, it's only a handful of people that qualify as that. And yet, you and everyone else start out. I'm saying start out because many of you would now say, well, I'm beyond that. But everyone starts out with a feeling, the lowliest, poorest serf in the 600s under some Franken Anglo-Saxon Hun chief somewhere had in his own way, her own way, that same kind of feeling that I in some way am going to conquer life. Or back then a woman thought, I'll find some guy and hang on to him that he's going to conquer life. And then people feel it today. It is not some kind of delusion. It is not some kind of personal peccadillo that's in conflict with trying to live a better life. It's in everyone. That's part of the missing ingredient. That is part of what makes life grow. So it's not a matter that everybody else, the many, people not involved with this, it's not simply that they do not see the fact. The cold, hard statistics that life publishes, just like a big old ticker board running, that you just look up. The number of successful people in any field, anything I'm interested in, you could stick them in your closet. And the chances that you're going to become one is about that. But ordinary people do not have to know that. Please note, not the many. They survive their appointed years. They can get fat, get themselves a Cadillac, a couple of homes, at least eat well, almost anywhere on this planet now, survive. And you don't have to, in some way, face up to these statistics. It's not a matter that you catch an ordinary person at the age of 40 or 50 and say, hey, you spent your whole life, I met you in college, and you said that you were going to go out and become a great author. What are you doing now? Well, I own a bakery out in Des Moines. But you remember how we used to sit? Yeah, I remember. You remember we would sit down at that place and eat pizza and talk about writing the Great American? Yeah, I remember all that. Boy, I bet you feel miserable now, don't you? I bet you're ashamed of yourself, aren't you? Hell, he's no more ashamed of himself than anybody else. Maybe get a few drinks in him if you weren't that pushy. You might say, yeah, we all had our dreams. But you were going to live in Europe. You're going to just pursue sex. You're going to chase women until you died after you got famous. And now what? You said, well, I got married about 2 years after I left college. I got 5 kids. I've been married to the same woman. You know, sex is no big deal at my age anymore. My wife weighs 300 pounds. And you look at me. And you say, tut, 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 shame on you. You can't tut, 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 shame on you to somebody. Their feeling is that's life. That's the way they're wired up. I did not become successful in the way in which I dreamed of it at one time. But in the way necessary, the person was fed. But in the way necessary that you people, I'll take it back, we're running out of tape. Don't worry about you people. It's this when it bubbles up in life. And I'm the main one responsible. It cannot be fed mechanically, and it cannot be fed just in some way of us continuing to show up every week. It can't be fed by you accepting just what I say. It can't be fed by me writing another damn book. Everyone will starve to death. It is much too peaceful. Anytime it's peaceful, it's much too peaceful. But right now, as always, right now, again, right now, anew, it is so peaceful that we're in danger of starving to death. You'll find yourself, you'll look around and you're in the middle of a desert. And there is no manna from heaven. Not physically. And you starve to death. But as actual physical starving is, you lay down and you go out peacefully. You can still smile. It's a slow death. You don't realize really what's happening. There are no great pains. You just wither away. Except you're sure, well, I'm on a spiritual quest and withering away, maybe that's the way to go. If it is, I'm going to have to take the blame for it, but I'm telling you, that is not what was behind a Moses, a Muhammad, a Jesus. And when this so-called fabled river comes up enough, and I keep hinting it's come up at times that may be contemporary, it's wasted then if the people starve to death. And it's wasted if everybody peacefully lays down and dies. It takes a special kind of nose, I guess, to be able to smell not fall in the air, but revolution in the air.